Hello, welcome Freedom fans. Welcome to Real Talk.
Yeah, it's Real Talk for real estate investors. Episode 70.
I get it now. It's real.
Yeah.
Chris Soneno is our Director of Property Management.
Yep.
I'm the President, CEO of Freedom Real Estate Group. Aaron Davis. Chit chat about cash flows today.
Yeah, and all the wonderful things that go into calculating that and planning for changes. As we mentioned in the vlog, there's lots of things and variables that can feed into that.
And then all the adjacent considerations that we should be thinking about that affect our cash flow or maybe would offset or supplement ways that we make decisions in addition to the cash flow, right?
Yeah, and doing it in a way, not just from, we're going to do a little bit from our end, the business, and also flip side, because we're both investors, we're going to do it from the consumer end as investors a little bit. Kind of see how we make decisions, and then what we should be looking at as an investor as a whole. You
made a good point in the vlog. I was talking a little bit about some experience I had with homeowners association fees and all that kind of stuff, and it's not a huge impact on our portfolio, on the properties that your team manages, or on the properties that we renovate and sell to our investors. But it's one of those things that are out there, and there's a lot of other considerations that don't necessarily apply to most of the assets that we manage for our investors. So maybe we should talk a little bit about our kind of portfolio and the typical properties that we address. Not because it's the only thing to consider, but it lends a little perspective to the context that we talk about, right? So we do a lot of older properties, Dayton and Cincinnati and surrounding areas. Middletown's a big one. And a lot of single-family homes.
A lot of single-family.
Most of those don't have, to your point, HOAs and condo associations and that kind of thing. So that's, a lot of the context that when you and I talk about it, we usually start there. And then there's exceptions or variances.
Yeah. So majority of our portfolio, most of our product is a high C, low B class, some mid-range B class, higher B class assets. Pretty even split. Probably 45% are multifamily, and the rest are single-family homes from a product standpoint. From our portfolio standpoint, about half, or pretty much even split. Single-family versus multifamily.
Yep. So we've talked about the pro forma and that kind of thing and how people buy. And we have, a lot of people care about cap rates and cash on cash, both the dollar amount and then what's the percent. And those are important factors for sure.
Right.
But I've always felt like the appreciation of the property was a missing variable that people don't consider.
Right.
And then, what do you do with maintenance costs? And what number should you assume? And all these things that everybody's got their own way of doing it.
Right.
You should assume X percent of X. Well, I saw somebody the other day was assuming a percentage of the value of the property as opposed to a percentage of the rents collected.
Right.
You've got what's the right way to do it? It's like, what's the right way to predict the future?
Right.
It's not a perfect science.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So the pro forma that we were using was a general percentage of asset value.
That's right.
As just a base. As you said, there's outliers. When we started asking the questions, but what if?
Right, that's right.
All of a sudden, we're like, that's a good. Let's see some real data. So we pulled some information for portfolio about what's been sold over the last year, and then say, okay, what are our clients spending on maintenance expenses? What is the real cash flow? What actually is getting brought in for rents?
Yeah.
And then we were able to maybe shift a little bit of what our pro forma looked like to try to make it a little bit more.
Yeah, the biggest impact for me is the fact that we spend a lot of our time talking with the customers who are going through the hardest situation, right? Somebody destroys their property or that whatever, they have an expensive repair or whatever on a turn or whatever. So that occupies our minds a lot as the product and property management leaders. And but the reality is the vast majority of our investors have very good performing properties with a few of those hiccups.
Like little to no issues.
That's right.
Yeah.
The vast majority. I
Right.
mean, and we don't think about that a lot. You and I don't day to day because we're just mailing them checks. Right? So those don't provoke a lot of conversations, right?
Right.
I mean, unless we're reading thank you notes, right? So, building who do you build a pro forma around, the worst case scenario, the best case scenario? So I think where that takes me in terms of cash flow is the reason we tend to think about, I need to make sure that that's a good cash flowing property, whatever, 200, 400, whatever your good cash flow number is it should be a variable, but how much cash are you sitting on? How prepared are you for, the worst case scenario that could happen? If you own that property for 20 years, you're going to have it at some point. You know what I mean? So, are you buying this property to get rid of it in 2 years, or is this something you're holding for 20 years? That's a variable. How old is the property? How recent was the renovation? How thorough was the scope of the renovation? What's the capital appreciation potential in that given area? Those are all important considerations, right?
Yeah, and that kind of brings us into every product that comes down the line, every real estate deal that exists can serve different investors with different strategies, different ways.
Mm-hmm.
The numbers are all roughly the same.
Mm-hmm.
It's just what's that investor's preference.
Yeah.
And so having that conversation of, are you holding it for 3 to 5, refinance after 3? Are you planning to hold it for a year, force the market and sell? All of those things also matter from a management perspective. Also how that performa performs.
Yeah.
All of that matters. And so building a marketable piece of data like a performa in a way that services all types of investors with all the different strategies is interesting.
Here's kind of where we landed in terms of what do we start with when we show investors. And I don't think it's an all-inclusive list of details in our pro forma. What I think it is the critical things you can't not consider, right? And so we included, taxes, some estimate for insurance, a calculation for a mortgage payment based on current rates, actual rent numbers because the property's rented, so we can look at that actual rent that's coming in compared to those relatively fixed costs,
right?
And say, hey, that's what our cash flow is. And then we added to that considerations for 2 big variables: maintenance and vacancy, and appreciation. Neither of which we can really know, right? We can kind of estimate based on past performance, and I think we used a 3%. 3% would be a huge exaggeration if we have this kind of flat year that we're expected to have. If you ask the future, the fortune tellers, it would be super low if we have another year like we just had where things go 5-10% appreciation or whatever else. We just threw in this kind of macro
middle of the road
average or whatever of 3%. I think it's kind of conservative if you're going to hold a property for 5+ years.
Right. But
we threw that in there, and we threw in some, consideration for maintenance. But the thing is, those are guesses, right? And my recommendation is be prepared for a meaningful appreciation of your property over time. Be prepared for some big expense in maintenance of your property at some point in time, whether it's 6 months from now or 6 years from now. You're going to have some big expense at some point. You're going to want to upgrade. You're going to need to replace a furnace at some point. Hopefully not in if you're buying a turnkey property, it shouldn't be in that first year. But however you buy your property, whether at some point you're going to
have some expenses.
You're going to have some capital investment into that property, right?
Right.
So I think you should add to our pro forma a bunch of other variables. If you're going to cash out and refi every 5 years as the property appreciates, then you should be thinking about interest rate changes of potential, right?
Right.
I mean, our interest rates now have gone up a couple of percent in the last few months, but we're still not historically high interest rates, right? So there's no promise they're going to be 3% again next year. So anyway, you can take some historic guess as to what that might be in 5 years when you want to refinance. But that's a whole nother thing you could speculate about, right? The appreciation of the property, refining, taking cash out, et cetera, that a lot of people like to mess with.
Yeah.
So rambling a little bit. I got my caffeine in me. There's not a set I have to have X amount of dollars per property.
Right.
I think I was mentioning before that if I was buying some condo with everything's brand new,
right,
and the roof is accounted, that is taken care of by somebody else, the landscaping is accounted for somebody else, et cetera, and I'm cash flowing $100, that's a lot easier pill to swallow than a 100-year-old property that's got a tenant paying that's been there for 6 years, but the property hasn't been touched in a decade.
Right, and it's cash flowing the same $100.
Yeah, I'm not going to buy that for $100 in cash flow.
Right, right, and then and then honestly, like that I mentioned this in the blog too. Is I go back to 8% cap rate because that always seems to be the number.
Yeah.
8%. But an 8% cap at Dayton is very much different than I mentioned Westchester, but like even Beaver Creek or any of the other like surrounding suburbs of Dayton. It's a very different property and asset and everything. So, and those of you that aren't super familiar with our market, like we're talking about $100,000 property in Dayton at an 8% cap and a $220,000 property at an 8% cap.
Yeah.
Those are very, very different properties,
True.
and they're going to perform very different.
Over
Maintenance
time.
is going to be different.
Yep.
Tenant experience is going to be different. And I'm not deterring away from Dayton. It's definitely a good place to have. Lots of appreciation going on there. Lots of investors buying and doing all the things to make that a good asset. But the higher class properties, you have to account for other things.
Yeah, and a C-class property versus a B-plus class property, you have to account for different things.
Right.
Like some maintenance and some turn and that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, collections I think is going to be. I'm a little bit concerned about collections in the over the next year because rents have all just gone crazy, right?
Right.
Meanwhile, people who are paying rents, we saw some wages increase over the last year, but man, rents have moved a lot.
Yeah, economy bumped 8% maybe. Supposedly.
Yeah.
Rent increases nationwide average 20% increases.
Yeah, it's concerning to me.
Yeah, and so some of the conversation we've had in IPM with our clients is, we got to pump the brake. We can be aggressive with rent increases, but keep in mind, like our tenants haven't increased their household income the same rate that we're wanting to increase the rents.
That's right. Fortunately, our economy has seen some big moves in wages, but I don't think it's as big as the inflation in rent prices.
Correct.
So that's concerning to me a little bit. We're going to keep our eye on that. Collections will be, and not just here. I mean,
no, it's all over. Yep.
Will be an issue. So I think we don't want to be on the 120th percentile. When it comes to rent, setting rents or whatever. You don't want to turn a property every year, right?
Right, exactly.
You'd rather have tenants in there, the longer the better, but you also don't want to leave money on the table.
Yeah, so then you ask the question, like, money on the table, like, is it better to drop my rent by $100 a month?
Yeah.
Play the long game with appreciation and just keeping the property nice, keep tenants happy, keeping them in there. That way, when 3 years down the road, that tenant decides to buy their house or their kids move to college and they decide to move to Florida or whatever fancy things they're doing, then you can turn the property and push the market and have that experience and then the extra cash flow when the market's in your favor. We're talking about two different markets here too. We're talking about a asset value market and the rental market that work kind of in tandem. So a lot of our pro formas are built off of asset value, the ARV, whereas a lot of the value I bring to this conversation is, what are our rents? Are they real? Because we could market a property all day long at $180,000 and try to sell a cap rate, but if I can't rent it somewhere,
made up rent number,
if I can't rent it where it's going to set the owner and the residents up for success long term, like we're just shooting numbers on a board, right?
I really like this. We've committed recently to having properties rented as opposed to forecasting rents.
Right.
When we sell our single family turnkey product, it's been a great move for us actually. Both in terms of like, instead of guesstimating the cash flow, and sometimes we're $50 short, sometimes we're $50 high or whatever, right? So instead of guessing the cash flow, we're just selling the actual cash flow that exists today, right? Which is better for our investors. But, at the end of the day, even if you rent the property first, but you've escalated the rent too high and created a volatile situation, there's a little bit of a risk too, right? Are you creating a turn every year, or are you keeping your tenant there for 3+ years, right?
Right.
There's a difference between those two things, right? There's a cost that comes with turning. And there's also generally a cost that comes with having to evict somebody because they're not paying in time or whatever. So assuming that that's a percentage of the potential turns or whatever. So those are considerations, I think, in your cash flow calculation too. Like it's X cash flow, but I'm really straining my rental
Right.
population.
Right.
Then how promising is it?
Right.
So
exactly.
I think that matters a little bit too. What other thoughts come to mind when you think about that cash flow number? My number is $300 a month or whatever people are thinking.
We talked briefly about like understanding what our end buyers' goals are with the property. Like that's very, very critical. And for multiple reasons, and arguably maybe I'm just biased because of majority of what my job is here. But that tenant experience matters. So if we have a client, this actually just happened recently. Unfortunately, a guy bought 2 or 3 properties from us, held them for a year, and now we're kicking out tenants because he wants to sell them retail because the retail market's hot. And was like, well, that's not what this product is. So being very, very clear. It wasn't
put together with that strategy, so it's not going to work well.
Right. And then now it's like, well, we've luckily established good rapport with the tenants. Like it doesn't always work out, but sometimes we're able to place them somewhere else and give a different owner good experience, right? So knowing that up front, like, hey, this is your strategy, is what you want to do. Now, granted, that's subject to change. Market changes. Somebody may decide that Tennessee's a better market, down the road. We get that. But knowing that before we get fully through a contract and we're signing at the closing table, we know, okay, hey, this is the experience this person wants. That sets us up for success too, because then I'm able to help provide that. But it does ultimately go back to how we present really all of the numbers.
Yeah, I think your strategy is a good point. So if you consider, for instance, another thought came to mind. If you're thinking about a single family home as a rental to purchase as an investment, and let's say it hasn't been renovated, it's the fixtures and the improvements or whatever are old or minimal over the last decade plus. It's cash flowing really good, per your purchase price and your rent income, but all the fixtures and stuff are dated. Well, you've got to be prepared to make an investment there, right?
Right.
So let's say you're making $600 a month in cash flow or whatever, but you're about to get hit with a $15,000 bill whenever that person moves out or something fails or whatever else, right?
Right.
That's a spectrum, right? That's not a single thing. Like, has it been renovated? Yes, or has it not been renovated? Whatever. That's a spectrum, and some of that has to do with just the quality of the product that's in the home. Is it all hard tile or is it carpet, right? And all those little things add up, right? Those considerations add up. So I think, when I think about buying my 10th single family home, it's freshly renovated, it's a lower cash flow, and I've got good cash flowing portfolio, 9 other properties that are cash flowing well, I'll take that risk. On a lower cash flow. It's been renovated. So my likelihood of having to buy a furnace or replace cabinets or these kind of like big things that happen occasionally is lower, right?
Right.
And I've got cash flow from the rest of my portfolio, so a cash hit's not going to kill me. And I see that property as being in a good area, and the appreciation of it is promising. So that move makes sense. If it's my first single family home, it's the only thing in my portfolio, I'm a little less likely to kind of ride the hiccups of the cash flow that might come from a property that's got dated fixtures and whatever else.
Right.
So anyway, that's another consideration, I think. It's just how much other cash are you sitting on to ride the wave that might come from a potential renovation, whether it's because the property hasn't been improved much lately, or because you don't have enough cash or other cash flow sources.
Yeah, and that comes down to just financial planning and making sure that if you purchasing a property, you plan for those things that are not. No, you're not going to know that those things are going to come.
And if you can't do that a little bit, like buy a mutual fund. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Buy a super safe mutual fund somewhere that requires no attention or
future
investment or whatever else.
Whoever said real estate was easy was wrong. It's hard and it is very risky. However, it's very rewarding if you do it well. And there's going to be, luckily in this organization, we went through the grinder and pain for you.
Yeah, true.
So, most of the time, like we're at a position where you're at the end of the project and you're taking over. We're just passing something off.
Yeah, buying a turnkey product is a different thing.
It's a different thing than doing burr strategy or something where you're having to go through the whole thing. You're actually at more risk of losing in that situation than buying something that's already been renovated. And it's actually cash flowing in the way it was projected.
Oh, sure. You do miss a little bit of that opportunity when we take hits sometimes.
Yeah.
Buy, improve, and capture that capital improvement or whatever. That's how we make money. So we also lose money a time or two, but we do it in volume so we get away with it. But trying as a first-time investor or maybe your second property or whatever, I'm going to buy that property and improve it long distance or whatever. That's a risky move, man. And I'll tell you, as the executive running this whole operation that does that at scale, that is a risky move. And I've done a couple of those actually. I've bought and sold individually or whatever. Renovated and improved and whatever, and you can do it well, and there's probably money to be made both in that improvement and then ultimately the cash flowing of the rental property, but just collecting rent and paying bills is a little bit easier. I would still advise anybody who's buying a rental property, even if the cash flow looks promising and you set aside X% for maintenance, whatever else, like you still don't know, like things could happen, right? Your tenant could get fired from their job. And they don't have a bunch of savings and whatever else. They're a month away from not being able to pay their rent, right? Like these random things can happen, and when they do, you want to be prepared for that. So I still always advise people who are buying rental properties to have a little egg set aside and account for vacancy or unexpected renovation.
A few years ago, Act of God had a tornado come right through the middle of Dayton.
That's right. And you would sit around and wait for the insurance, or you want to get it done and get renters in there within weeks, not months, right?
So deal with the insurance in the back. I mean, there's so many different variables that can go into how things could unfold.
Yeah.
The good thing, we mentioned this at the beginning, I don't know if it was in this podcast or in the vlog earlier, but we had mentioned, you and I spend a lot of our time, putting out fires, dealing with the more difficult situations, unhappy owners, unhappy tenants, things that we're trying to mitigate. Yeah. But out of a portfolio of nearly 600 units, we're talking about 10 or 15.
Yeah, the
over
vast
the course
majority
of a few
of them
months.
We just mail checks.
Yeah, most of them, they're just like rent comes in, we cut a check, and they have cash flow each month. There's not a question. Actually, I have to go reach out to them like, hey, are you doing okay? Because we haven't heard from you in a while. Yeah. So knowing that most of the clients have a really good experience, kind of keeps the wheels turning a little bit, because then we know we're doing a good job and we're keeping it moving. So anything we're doing, like these pro formas and all that, is to improve. Yeah. So when that buyer comes back, or we bring in new buyers, they have a new experience.
I heard about an issue recently where an investor was concerned about some plumbing repair or whatever. It's a $200 cost. Why is it so expensive? And it, you know what I thought about, what it made me think right away was that if that is a devastating situation for you, you shouldn't have invested that money into a rental property. If a $200 expense is something that you couldn't account for, or be prepared for, or engage in productively, if that felt like an overwhelming thing, then you shouldn't be invested in a rental
now, if we have a $200 plumbing expense every single month for 6 months,
well, sure,
that's not a $200 expense anymore, and then I understand.
Then you're wondering why things aren't getting resolved.
Right. But we just had a similar situation where it was something weird. Like, we hadn't done it was a client that had purchased a property, didn't do a lot of exterior work, but like tenant moved in, and I guess they set something heavy on the back porch, and the porch sunk a little bit.
Oh no!
It's like, well, we can mitigate that, but what we didn't know up front is that a tree had also fallen and had hit part of the support beam, and then when they set that down, it's like, okay, well, now we have to mitigate a tree, we have to mitigate a porch, and that would have been just a couple $100 just sending our guys out there, nailing a couple things together. Turn into $1,000 tree removal, but there's the things like that's when your insurance becomes your friend.
Yeah, that's right.
But again, that's one of those things that you can't put on a performer. Like, oh, hey, on August 5th, you're gonna have a tree fall.
That's right.
Here's $1,000 bill.
That's right. You should account for the unknown to some extent, and if it's a single family home that's worth $150,000, $200,000, you should set aside. I mean, I would hold on to $10,000 that I'm ready to put in that property, and or if if you set aside a little egg, you can do that across multiple properties because generally speaking, they don't all happen at once, right?
Right.
So it is true that the larger your portfolio grows, the easier it is to manage catastrophes, right? You have cash flows that are offsetting other concerns as they come up. That's why I think that first deal, it's more important to have money set back. And it's also more important to be careful about the condition of the renovations and the cash flow.
Yeah, I have one client that I told him that when he bought his first like 5 or so, and I think he's up to like 17 or 18 now. Yeah. But he bought first 5. Most of them are single family. I think 1 or 2 duplexes, and then he was having a couple cash flow concerns because like 3 of them went vacant all at the same time, and we're trying to shuffle money around and. I told him that strategy. I was like, we should probably do for the next year is try to set more back. Take a little bit less for yourself, set as much back as you can, build up a nest egg. And I was like, and then I'm like, you can probably talk to your tax accountant, but a good strategy would be toward the end of the year, pay down your loans, get one of those things paid off. And then what he ended up doing is he paid off one of his properties and opened up a home equity line against that property and uses the funds from that home equity line to pay for repairs.
I see.
So
he's in a better cash position, maybe not getting as high a cap rate or whatever, but he's in a better cash position.
Yeah, and he essentially
the waves don't shake him as much.
Nope, now he doesn't. And we're about 2 years into this, so he's like, oh, this has changed the game for me. He's like, I can now save money, buy more properties, and not have to worry about expenses because I have this guy paid off, and I'm able to, use it's essentially a house credit card.
That's good. Yeah, glad that worked out for him. Yeah. I mean, every situation is case to case, right? I think maybe the best general advice is if it feels a little bit too close, right? Like if you're just barely going to be able to do it, right? And like, as long as nothing happens, if you're having to qualify your good decision with as long as XYZ, no, don't do it. Right. Don't do it. Prepare yourself for things that could happen. That way, when it does, you buy a property 18 months in, you have to turn over tenants, right?
Right.
Oh, okay, that stinks. I got to paint walls. I got to lose the rent that month or whatever. Hang-ups happen. You're not devastated. You're not, how am I going to pay the mortgage, right? You're prepared for it. It's not a big deal, and you don't lose out on the opportunity to move quick and get the next tenant in there because you're worried about where that $1,000 is going to come from, right? Right. When you're, I can't, how am I going to pay for this turnover or whatever, and you get delayed, and you're 2 months out, you're 2 months later, whatever. Then you're costing yourself money.
Exactly.
Right? So,
exactly.
Anyway, yeah, cash flow does matter. I, like many things, the solution to the problems that it could create is having a little more money, right? Mm-hmm. So just go buy yourself more money, guys. If it was only that easy. Yeah, cash flow matters. I think it's nice to be able to, when you're careful about planning, you can afford to be smart about investing and, respond to the hiccups that happen. Mm-hmm. When you cut it a little bit too close, then you put yourself in a volatile situation.
Exactly.
And end up costing yourself more money. Well, do we hit everything?
I believe so. Yeah,
absolutely.
Pretty good
Nothing
stuff.
else to talk about.
No. Yeah, you and I both know we could do this all day long. So
yeah, obviously, we do.
Yeah, we do. We do it a lot.
It's fun work. All right, guys. Thanks for listening. As always, invest smart,
live happy.
Bye, friendly fans.
Nothing on this show should be considered specific personal or professional advice. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions and information on this show are not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss.